and even playing a role in imposing them. So today, India is a confident and active player on the global stage, participating in G20, in BRICS, and that reflects a changing nature of global power. India is taking a more active role regionally as well, and also across its bilateral relations. Now, I'm told, and I don't know whether this fact is correct, that India's foreign service is about the same size as that of Singapore. But I can only say that quality is making up for quantity. But given the country's democratic and legal traditions, I hope India will try, by inspiration and by example, to contribute to this international discourse on the rule of law. And I hope that India will participate actively within IDLO as well, as a partner, as a member in the not too distant future. At times when the international order is in flux, we're living in a time when the international order is in flux. Some states are advocating unilateral approaches. Others are trying to shape the international system in their own image. Multilateralism risks falling into crisis. And India's leadership in shaping a rule-based, multipolar model of international relations based on mutual respect and universal standards of human rights could be critical. Now, the success, of course, of any legal regime depends on whether the powerful follow the same rules as everyone else. And as India seeks a greater voice in shaping global rules and norms, its own willingness to uphold those same principles at home and abroad will be important, not just for India, but also for the legitimacy and effectiveness of the international order that India wants to shape. So, as the head of the world's only governmental organization with an exclusive mandate to promote the rule of law and development, let me invite Indian institutions and organizations to partner with us in our global work. And we at IDLO hope to have India as a partner in the quest for a future that is just, inclusive, and which every person can live with dignity and under the rule of law. Thank you.
You all agree that we've had a very stimulating and enlightening lecture by Irene Khan on a topic which is of great importance to us. And I think she deserves a standing ovation for her lecture. Sorry, I'm not standing because of problems with my leg. Now the question-answer series, but one request. Put your question, not a lecture. Identify herself and she'll answer that, I'm sure, to the satisfaction of all here. So if we start with anyone who wants to put the first question, sure. Please identify yourself. Sure, go on, identify yourself. Sorry? Arre Baba, identify yourself. Who are you? Lawyer, advocate, architect? Okay, say that. Yeah.
So, madam, it is said that you show me the face, I will tell you the rule. This is the law of the land or law of the whole world. So, when there will be a change of paradigm of equal opportunity for all.
If I heard you correctly, you said equal opportunity for all?
Show me the face, I will tell you the rule.
Okay, show me the face and I will tell you the rule. Yes, you're right, and that's what I said, that a lot of people, poor people, especially those who are not able to get the opportunity, do feel that way. But I think the answer there is to improve the institutions, on the one hand, but also to empower people. You know, the women, for example, who are now reading the Indian Constitution, they will not take this type of a situation lying down. We've seen it, for example, with the Right to Information Act, and what the Right to Information Act did, where most of the queries that are coming are from the local level about people asking about their entitlements, people asking about simple issues about schools and rations and social security and pensions and questions like that. That's empowerment of people. And so it's, that's the way in which you address power, is by strengthening accountability. And I think in a democratic system like India, you are well placed to do that.
I believe the next question is by Professor Kundu. You'd ask a question, Professor Kundu?
Amitabh Kundu was at Jawaharlal University until recently.
Yeah, Amitabh Kundu, yes, please.
I must mention, I was born in Bangladesh, and I'm one of the migrants who didn't have at that time any problem. The key message that I take from your presentation is that in order that the rule of law is effective in the context of SDGs, is that you should invest not only in the institutions, but also in the people and the empowerment, so that they have access to the rule of law. And as you said, that the judiciary at the highest level sometimes interprets the law, by taking rich and the poor as equal without really being concerned about the access to the legal system. I find that such, anomaly exists in the whole social science literature. As a student of Amartya Sen, I remember he said the welfare economics, which is supposed to be for the poor, treats the suffering of a rich man as a big result of indigestion at the same level as of a poor because of starvation. So don't you think that this problem of rule of law not being effective in reaching the people is basically because of this kind of a bias which exists in the society?
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, and that's why I talked about legal blindness. The law is supposed to be blind. And so the rich man and the poor man have the same rights in court. But the rich man can afford a better lawyer, and the poor man might not even have the money, the bus fare to get to the court. And that's why I mentioned the women's movement, because gender blindness has been something that has pervasive in laws and regulations all over the world. And what was the way in which today at least the rhetoric is right. There might still be a lot of injustice, but the rhetoric is right, and there is some progress being made on women's rights. Why? Because of mobilization of women's groups. Mobilization of civil society, of women's groups, of others, and then you educate. Even judges do get educated, I believe. They will also change over time. They learn. And you can see from the Novartis case how international law was used to come to a particular decision. So I think it's a slow process. One has to be patient.
Thank you. I think the next question is by General Nindra Kumar. Would you like to put your question? Yeah. Give the mic.
General Neelendra Kumar with Bachpan Bachao Andolan. My question is that in the context of least developed countries and the inclusive growth that you spoke about, and the pointer to the right to free and compulsory education in the context of SDGs, what would you talk about the skill-based education so that it can promote sort of self-development and thereby the empowerment? Thank you.
Yes, I think there's been a lot of emphasis being put on entrepreneurship, what you talk about skills, and rather than people getting, looking for jobs, not a job seeker, but a job creator. And that's a trend that is happening across the world in developed countries as well as developing countries. And I do think that that needs to be accompanied by a lot of other things, like access to credit, for example. Understanding how to financial literacy. When we do now these kinds of skills training, it's not the same skills that I learned in school. My daughter learned different kinds of skills. So yes, the world is changing, and we do need to invest in skills. Education, the right to education, is one of those rights which are, it's the least disputed right. The question is whether you pay for it or not, and the quality of education. I think a lot more emphasis needs to be put. Under MDGs, there was emphasis on getting kids to school, getting girls to school, getting the enrollment numbers up. And then they realized that for girls at least, dropout was a big problem. So how do you stop dropout exactly at the age where you have underage marriages, young teenagers? And then the other big question is the quality of education. So we need to dig a little bit deeper into the systemic problems and invest in education. But that education alone will not produce the results. And it's the integration, the interrelationship of the goals that's, I think, very important.
Good evening. My name is Manju Seth. I'm a former ambassador. You mentioned that people turn to customary, systems of justice. In this context, I wanted your views on whether this would not be an impediment to the implementation of the rule of law and to the achieving of SDGs, especially in the context of the Kap Panchayats and honor killings and, summary justice and the kangaroo courts across the world. Actually, if you see, these are there. And how can we enforce the rule of law in such a situation? And I feel there would be an impediment to SDGs, and I would like to know your views. Thank you.
You are touching a very sensitive subject in many countries, as you know. Last month, I was at a conference on access to justice in Kigali, in Rwanda, which had been sponsored by the Chief Justice of Sierra Leone and the Chief Justice of Rwanda and the Chief Justice of South Africa. In Rwanda, in Kigali. And the three Chief Justices had brought together basically legal aid providers, paralegals, community justice people. So it was very interesting to see the formal justice system actually talking to the informal justice. And they had done it because they had realized that people were not coming to the courts. All these things were actually happening in the communities. So the first thing is to engage with them. You can't pretend they don't exist. What I have found in my experience is when we are discussing with governments, whether it's Afghanistan or Somalia, the government in Mogadishu or the government in Kabul does not want to hear anything about those things that are happening in their villages or communities. They would like us to train the judges, invest in the Judicial Training Academy and so on, and get going with it. But the judges themselves are saying, you've got to start by talking to these people. Now, all of these things are not necessarily bad. There are some features. We did a study a few years ago looking at 8 different countries and looking at women's access to justice in 8 countries around the world, from Namibia to Papua New Guinea, different parts of the world. Why did women go to informal justice systems? What were their expectations? And we looked, for example, at a comparative study between Tanzania and Mozambique. Both countries had introduced access to justice laws on women's access to land. In Tanzania, that had actually improved the formal system. In Mozambique, the law was on the books, but nothing much had been done. In Mozambique, women were still going to the local ways of dispute resolution, whereas in Tanzania, they were turning to the institutions. So basically what it shows is that people will go for justice where it is cheapest, most effective, and convenient. So one needs to kind of look at that. And what is actually happening more and more is attempts to improve the local justice systems. Now in Rwanda, the Chief Justice mentioned that in Rwanda, of course, they have a history of gacaca. Gacaca was the very rough and ready justice that they used at the community level to deal with the genocidaires. But after that experience, what they've now done is they've set up these informal mediation mechanisms at the village level. They don't allow serious crimes. Crimes are still a crime against the state, and so state has to take responsibility for crimes. But for civil disputes, law, property laws, family disputes, and all those kinds of things, small things, those mediation mechanisms were working very well. And what they had done was they had insisted that at least 1/3 of the mediators have to be women. So they had actually put into place things that didn't exist under customary law to make it better, but they had not done away with it. So there is a kind of a reform process that's slowly taking place, which I found very interesting. So there are ways in which you can do it. It's impossible in places like Kenya, where, big countries like that, with bad transportation systems, no one's going to go to court. Things are going to be discussed at the level. And then, of course, there are ideas, there are value systems. Now, is it better to lock someone up for 10 years in prison for murder, or is it better to take blood money and resolve it? Now that's a huge question in Kenya among the tribes there. They think it's terrible that people actually get locked up in prison. It's a horrible thing to do to a human being. So, whereas we would say it's a horrible thing probably not to lock up the human being if the person is a murderer. So there are different values that you also, these are all cultural things. It's very hard for outsiders to come in and impose it, but talking internally within the communities, showing them perhaps examples from other places, and over time you can maybe change the worst aspects of it. No, there is honor killings. Of course, there's nothing. There are some things. I mean, there is a, let me put it, a floor or a ceiling that you have just to draw a red line, and there it's a question of educating. Punishing honor killings when they take place, but also educating women themselves to stand up to it. FGM, female genital mutilation, is another issue where women themselves sometimes participate in these crimes too.
Yes.
Honorable Chair, I'm Sheko Daily. And respected ma'am, do you ever envision that there will be one